Hello and welcome to this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. I'm going to do something that today I'm going to try and share quite a bit of information, but the primary reason I want to do this way is because I believe we're in some serious trouble in this country. When I say serious, I especially mean black folks. And the reason I say it's so serious is because I think there are a lot of black people who don't really want to believe that we're in serious trouble. Even though we've had for several years now, even before Trump was elected, we've had folks saying, hey, we got to take the country back. And as some of us have been saying, they meant that both ways, back and backwards. And as you know, I believe in looking at history because history will tell us a lot about what's going on now and also can point to certain things that we need to look out for in the future. Well, one of the things that really hasn't been talked about or dealt with in this country is the fact that there was a war of terrorism or a terrorist war waged against black people primarily in the South after the so-called Civil War. And we need to understand that was a terrorist war. It wasn't just a couple of riots or a couple of little things. What we need, this map I've got up here now, I'm going to take a minute to look at it because if you look at this, this is between emancipation, which is 1865, and 1900. So we're talking about 35 years. And in that 35-year period, there were major attacks on black people. That's why I say it was a war, a terrorist war, because we understand this is where most of the plantations were, where most of the slavery that took place, these were the slave states. Even though there were other states where there was slavery, this was the primary ground of slavery. And look down at the bottom, it says in 1893, almost 30 years after emancipation, blacks in the South were being murdered at a rate of at least one every 40 hours. And now, a lot of these were lynchings, vicious lynchings. But there were also some straight out attacks widespread against black people. And this was for over three primary things. One, voting. Two, land. And three, business. These were the three primary things that we were attacked about. I'll give you an example. Look right dead in the center. It says Winston County, Mississippi, 1871. Every schoolhouse for blacks burned. Okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about three particular massacres, because we should understand these massacres both in terms of what happened as well as the time frames, and then ask yourself why we as a people don't know about these to the extent that they should be recognized every year. Just like you have the other folks that deal with the Holocaust every year. And you got, on the other hand, you got the folks who lost the Civil War. They celebrate stuff. They have reenactments every year. They got statues and monuments all over the place that recognize the people who lost, the generals who lost. How do you have that? And also, they have holidays. They have holidays for the losers. But that's because we don't really understand that as far as they're concerned, the Confederacy didn't lose. There's a phrase, the South will rise again. They mean that because it's not lost. So I want to examine for a few minutes 3 massacres that occurred within the same period, within 1873, 1874, and 1887. And they were in relatively close proximity. Okay? And again, they took place in the South. And when you look at them together, it's hard put not to recognize that this was part of a terrorist war. This wasn't just a few angry white men, just for the heck of it. These were organized attacks with specific purposes, okay, for specific reasons. All right. Now the first one is Colfax, and I want you to watch a very, very short video that deals with Colfax.
April 13th, 1873, the Colfax Massacre erupted in Grant Parish Courthouse in Colfax, Louisiana. The White League, a parliamentary group intent on securing white rule in Louisiana, clashed with the almost all-black state militia on Easter Sunday. The result left 150 families missing a loved one. Of the 150 black men that were slain, more than half of them were slaughtered in cold blood, while just 3 members of the White League were killed. It should be duly noted that the League was a Democratic organization, and noted again that the Democrats have not always been liberal supporters of black causes. 2 laws that Southern Democrats hated were the 14th and 15th Amendments. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to blacks and declared that no state was to deprive them of life, liberty, or property. The 15th Amendment prevented a state from denying the vote to any person because of their race. Together, these laws guaranteed blacks equal citizenship, and the good people of Colfax just weren't having it on Easter Sunday of 1873. After the Colfax Massacre, the federal government convicted 3 whites for the murders, but as fate would have it, they were freed when the U.S. Supreme Court declared that they had been convicted unconstitutionally.
Okay, let's understand about the Colfax. Sometimes they call it a riot, sometimes they call it a massacre. I guess it depends on whoever is doing the talking. First of all, it was in 1873 that the massacre jumped off, but I need to give you a little bit of background. Understand, Civil War ended in 1865, and that's when the Emancipation Proclamation kicked in. But the state governments that were set up during the Reconstruction, and Reconstruction, let's be clear, I need to reemphasize this over and over. There was a period between 1865 and 1877. It was called Reconstruction. Some people called it the Radical Reconstruction. But basically, we're talking about after the Civil War the process of trying to put things back together, as well as deal with all of these newly freed black people. Okay? And so the state governments that were set up during the Reconstruction period had basically upset the black folks like crazy because they're trying to deal with just coming out from under slavery, right? It also bothered a lot of Northerners because these states started electing the same people that were the leaders before the war and were leaders of the Confederacy. And these included the former vice president of the Confederacy, ex-generals and officials, and many Confederate senators. Because understand, during the Confederacy, they had their own government. They don't like to talk about that, but they had a president of the Confederacy, a vice president. They had senators. They had a government, the Confederacy. And so after the Civil War, the same people were getting put back in power. Okay, to the extent, a lot of folks up north said, wait, don't they realize they lost? No, they didn't. They refused to recognize it. They also, in the South, set up a system called the Black Codes. And these codes set up a system that was designed to deal with the emerging strengths of black people coming out of slavery. And they set up rules, laws. It set up a system of employment for former slaves that was very similar to slavery. Included things like the convict leasing programs, which we talked about. If you've never heard about that, it was called slavery by another name. Let's look that up under that term. Just Google it. Slavery by another name. It also said, these black codes said that workers were to be paid by being given housing, food, and clothing, not money. Don't pay them like regular people. Okay? You can pay them with food, clothing, and shelter. That's just like slavery, right? In some places, they also paid them. They paid them with script, not money. Script was where you got a piece of paper that you took to the store. Anyway. They also had laws that controlled the freedom of movement for the former enslaved Africans. The workers could now choose who they wanted to work for, but they must work for a white man, or they could be fined for vagrancy because they didn't consider a black person to be a legitimate employer. They could also still be arrested for leaving the plantation without written consent of who they work for. You see, they still operated just like slavery because you had the same people who were the former slave owners in charge. Excuse me. I had to get a little agua. Now, let me make this part clear. Over the next few minutes, you're going to hear me talk about Republicans and Democrats. But you have to understand, we got to flip the script. When I say Democrats in this context, in this time period, they're not the Democrats that we have today. When I say Republicans, they're not the Republicans that we have today. Back at that time, it was the complete opposite. The Republican Party was the one that black people were supporting, because the Republican Party at that time was considered the more liberal. The Democratic Party was the straight out, in your face, racist party. The exact opposite of, or at least somewhat opposite of what it is today. Okay? So now in Grant Parish, in Colfax, Louisiana, The black folks were basically in charge. They had won elections and everything, along with some whites who were in the Republican Party as well. So on April 13th, 1873, the Colfax Massacre erupted in Grant Parish Courthouse in Colfax, Louisiana. The White League, and that's something, that was a paramilitary group that was working on taking back and white rule in Louisiana. And they clashed with the almost all-black state militia on that Easter Sunday. They killed at least 150 black men, and most of them were slaughtered in cold blood, whereas only 3 of the white men, White League, were killed. And I need to make sure that you're understanding what we're talking about here. The white paramilitary group killed unarmed men who were in the courthouse. Then they rode down and killed those who attempted to flee. They dumped some bodies in the Red River. And about 50 black folks who survived the afternoon were taken prisoner. And later that night, they were killed by their captors. And I'm going to tell you in a minute how they were killed. Now, while this was going on, the state militia colonels went to Colfax with warrants to arrest 50 white men and to install a new compromise government. And when they got there, they found the courthouse had been burned to the ground. They also found many bodies of men who had been shot in the back of the head or in the neck. At least one body had been burned. Another man's head had been beaten beyond recognition. Another had a slashed throat. Some black folks who had survived told the colonels that black folks had dug a trench around the courthouse to protect it from what they saw as an attempt by white Democrats to steal the election. They were attacked by white men with rifles, revolvers, and a small cannon. And when the black folks refused to leave, the courthouse was burned and the black folks were shot down. Like I say, they were marching the prisoners away and shooting them in the back of the head. On April 14th, some of the Governor Kellogg's new police force arrived from New Orleans. Several days later, 2 companies of federal troops arrived. They searched for white paramilitary members, but many had fled to Texas or up in the hills. These officers filed a military report, in which they identified by name 3 whites and 105 black folks who had been killed. And then they noted that they recovered 15 to 20 unidentified blacks from the river. The exact number of dead was never firmly established, although there was at least 105 plus another 15 or 20 unidentified. People who lived there at the time said that there were more. And then there's a marker there, a state marker, that says 3 whites and 150 black folks. Of course, they didn't put that historical marker up until 1950. Now, I want you to understand this. Think about if something like that happened today, where they just literally killed 150 black people. you would have to say that that was a massacre, wouldn't you? And how can we have an incident that is documented where 150 or 100, even if it was just 100 black folks were killed, and yet there's no national recognition of that day? And I say, why not? Why not? Now, I put this up here. This is when I said they had black codes and stuff. Now, you had secret groups that came out, white groups. They would sometimes call themselves Ku Klux Klan and other things, but they also had white camellias and different things. But here's the thing. The I Am Committee, okay? First, no man shall squat Negroes on his place unless they are all under his employ, male and female. Negro women shall be employed by white persons. All children shall be hired out for something. What? Negroes found in cabins to themselves shall suffer the penalty. Negroes should not be allowed to hire Negroes. Idle men, women, or children shall suffer the penalty. All white men found with Negroes in secret places shall be dealt with, and those that hire Negroes must pay promptly and act in good faith to the Negro. I will make the Negro do his part, and the white must too. For the first offense is 100 lashes. The second is looking up a sapling. I don't know what that means. And this I do for the benefit of all young and old. Okay? And again, and I say this because some people say, well, that was back in the day. Here's the problem. You got folks that want to take it back to that. They want to take it back. Now, let's go to the next year. That was 1873. In 1874, in December 7th, as a matter of fact, you had the Vicksburg massacre that occurred in Mississippi. And that ranged from 75 to as many as 300 black folks who were killed. Okay? What happened there was that in the November elections of 1874, the white folks in the Democratic Party had won control back of the House of Representatives for the first time since the Civil War. Because immediately after the Civil War, which is 1865, remember it ended in 1865, black people had been the majority and had won. Okay, they had won control of the House of Representatives, or the representatives from Mississippi and Tennessee and Alabama. So when they did that, oh, they were happy. They were happy. They were getting happy. And they started moving on the, now that was state level or federal level. So then as soon as they won that, they started moving on the state level and the county level. And they were focused on the county especially because that was dominated by black Republicans, including in one particular case, there was a sheriff, a black sheriff named Peter Crosby. He had served in the Union Army during the war, and he had been elected sheriff in Vicksburg, or the county that included Vicksburg, okay? Now, in early December, the white Democrats had demanded that all the black officials resign. And said, yeah, y'all just resign. And they told Crosby that he better not just resign, but leave town. So Crosby went up to the state capitol to talk to the governor, who was a Republican. Therefore, he was he was leaning towards black folks. And he talked to him, and the governor, and here's what the governor did. He ordered the riotous and disorderly persons who had expelled from office the legally elected sheriff to disperse and to retire peaceably and submit to the legally constituted authorities. In other words, give yourselves up to the legally elected representatives, which included Peter Crosby as the sheriff. Then he instructed a Warren County militia company to cooperate with Peter Crosby to regain office and suppress the mob. And he also suggested that Crosby should summon a posse for further assistance. Well, it didn't really affect the white folks in Vicksburg. They said, we don't care about that. But Sheriff Crosby's call for a posse, guess what happened? A strong group of black folks came from not only Vicksburg, but the surrounding areas, coming from the churches, the political clubs, and other institutions of black community life. They mobilized, and several hundred black folks started marching towards Vicksburg. Well, what do you think happened? The white folks opened fire on them, and they had much more better armaments. And so they had some brief standoffs, but finally the blacks were forced to flee because the firepower was just too great. And then for another 10 days, these white folks, joined by reinforcements from across the river in Louisiana, stayed on and started just killing black folks. 10 days. They terrorized the community. Killed, they say, at least 29 in that 10 days, but it was many more. And wounded a lot more. And the seat of county government stayed in the hands of the white liners, as they called. And Peter Crosby was compelled to resign again when they held him hostage. Can you imagine? In early 1875, J.P. Gilmer, a white man, was hired to serve as Peter Crosby's deputy. After a disagreement, Crosby tried to have him removed from office. Now remember, he wasn't elected. The white man wasn't elected. He was hired to serve as his deputy. So Crosby tried to have him removed from office. The white man, Gilmer, responded by shooting Crosby in the head on June 7th, 1875. Gilmer was arrested for the attempted assassination but never brought to trial. Crosby survived, but he never made a full recovery, and he finished the remainder of his term with a white citizen representing him in the office. Yeah, we're talking about crazy people. Whew. And you're going to see in a few minutes, I got to show you a picture of this young lady. In fact, let me show you. Her name was Julia Hayden. Julia Hayden was 17 years old. She was a school teacher at 17. And she has started teaching at a school for freed black people. And she was shot to death by the White League within 3 days of starting to teach at the school. What can I say about Vicksburg? After all these folks were killed, The military took testimony from both black and white residents, but no one was ever prosecuted. Understand that. No one was ever prosecuted. You had the red shirts and other white insurgents. They suppressed the Republican vote of both whites and blacks, and they had smaller scale riots in the state up to the 1875 elections, at which time the white Democrats regained control of a majority of seats in the state legislature. Understand what's happening here. We're talking about a war, a terrorist war, where they were taking back the gains that black people made legitimately, and look at those years, 1875, this was 1874, 1875. You have to understand that this stayed in place for years. And if you think about it, when the civil rights workers went down south to register people to vote in the 50s and 60s, we're talking about 1950s and 60s, the black people had not been able to vote for years. And I haven't even talked about the lynchings, because the lynchings was started then and went on like crazy. So you're talking about a war, a terrorist war against black people. See, and a lot of times, black people who grew up in the North and never learned the history and are disconnected from their Southern family or relatives, some of them have a negative attitude about black Southerners and think that they just, they just cowards, they just this and that. They don't know the history. They don't know the history. They don't understand that black folks were slaughtered. They were massacred, and the government did nothing. People did not go to jail. You had lynchings that went on every single week for years. Okay? So it wasn't just the black folks didn't do nothing. It's that when they fought back, they were slaughtered. When they exercised their right for voting and having businesses and schools, right? They were attacked. One of the worst massacres was the Thibodaux massacre. This was in 1887. And in November of 1887, a mass shooting of black farm workers in Louisiana left at least 60 people dead. Bodies were dumped in unmarked graves. And the white press there, they were happy because what happened here was you had the rise of a black union. Sugar workers primarily. And see, we tend to think only cotton and stuff. If you've never seen my presentations about the 4 different crops that made up the backbone of the United States wealth: cotton, tobacco, hemp, and sugar. Say it again: cotton, tobacco, hemp, and sugar. And sugar was big in Louisiana. But in November 23, 1887, it was one of the bloodiest days in United States labor history. You have to understand, it wasn't just, just about some black folks. This was labor history. What happened was that the black farm workers had been gaining in strength. They already had the numbers. And so they decided to unionize. There was a state district judge named Taylor Beatty. He declared himself the head of the Peace and Order Committee in Thibodaux. He declared martial law, organized a local vigilante group and decreed that blacks within the city limits would need to show a pass to enter or leave. Now, Beatty was a cane planter, sugar cane planter, an ex-Confederate, an ex-slaveholder, and a former member of the Knights of the White Camellia. And I'll tell you a little bit about them in a second. Well, actually, the Knights of the White Camellia, and the camellia is a flower. It was founded by Democratic Confederate States Army Colonel in 1867 in Franklin, Louisiana. Their members were pledged to support the supremacy of the white race, to oppose the amalgamation of the races, meaning the mingling of the races, to resist the social and political encroachment of the so-called carpetbaggers, and to restore white control of the government. The Knights of the White Camellia was for years the leading terrorist organization in Louisiana. And they produced a reign of terror among the state's black population, especially it started in 1868, and they just went crazy for years. But now here's the difference between the White Camellias and the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan drew most of its membership from lower class Southerners, lower class people, period, white folks, even in the North. Okay? Primarily Confederate soldiers, veterans. But the White Camellia was mainly upper class Southerners, including doctors and landowners, newspaper editors, doctors and officers. They were also usually Confederate veterans, but they were the upper class of the antebellum society. You see, don't get it twisted. It was the poor white trash, and it was the rich white class, the slave owners. That was their thing. Now, after the tensions rose over a course of 2 weeks, vigilantes closed the entrances to the city on the morning of November 22nd. Now, the black sugarcane workers who are on strike, to get better wages and all of that stuff, right? They didn't like that because they were boxed in. In other words, they closed the city off. The vigilantes, they closed the city off and boxed in the strikers in the city. So when they went to leave, they shot up a couple of them, other vigilantes. They didn't kill them. But this triggered 3 days of violence in which the unresisting strikers and their families were executed. Not just in the town of Thibodaux, but in the surrounding woods and swamps. A black newspaper described the scene this way. It says 6 killed and 5 wounded is what the daily papers here say. But from an eyewitness to the whole transaction, we learned that no less than 35 Negroes were killed outright. Lame men and blind women were shot. Children were ruthlessly swept down. The Negroes offered no resistance. They could not, as the killing was unexpected. Those of them not killed took to the woods. The response was a massacre. There were several companies of white men, and they went around night and day shooting colored men who took part in the strike. Going from house to house, gunmen ordered Jack Conrad, a Union Civil War veteran, his son Grant, and his brother-in-law out of their house. The brother-in-law protested he was not a striker, but was shot and killed anyway. Jack Conrad was shot several times in the arms and chest, And he lived and later identified one of the attackers as his employer. One strike leader found in an attic was taken to the town common, told to run, and then was shot to pieces by a firing squad. Wow. Killings took places in the woods and the swamps and on the plantations, and bodies were dumped in a site that became a landfill. The workers returned to the fields on the growers' terms, while whites cheered a Jim Crow victory. The Daily Picayune blamed black unionizers for the violence, saying that they provoked white citizens and suggested the strikers would, quote, burn the town and end the lives of the white women and children with their cane knives. So they just flipped the script on it and said it was no longer a question of against labor, but one of law-abiding citizens against assassins. The Union died with the strikers, and the assassins went unpunished. There was no federal inquiry, and even the coroner's inquest refused to point a finger at the murderers. Sugar planter Andrew Price was among the attackers that morning. The next year, he won a seat in Congress. Southern black farm workers would not attempt to unionize again until the 1930s, when the Southern Tenant Farmers Union attracted both white and black members, but it was also met with a racist backlash. And they fought, and then they lost out until the Civil Rights era. In fact, we even know a little bit without knowing it. When Martin Luther King went to Memphis, do you remember what he went there for? He went there in support of the striking sanitation workers. Okay? And the sanitation workers, mostly black, were trying to get recognized as a union. And they were being fought tooth and nail by the white authorities. Yeah, see, there's a reason why. There's a reason why the South is so anti-union, and it really is. For those that don't know, it's viciously anti-union. But again, people, without knowing the history, a lot of times we tend to think, oh, it's just that the black people down there, they're so stupid, or they're this. It's just that they've had a history of being slaughtered and nobody helped them. There are many different examples where whites band together and attacked black people and nothing was done. And when I say that, I'm talking about some serious attacks. It was a terrorist war. We need to understand that because it could very well come again. I'm not going to say it definitely will, but it could come again. We have the same elements, and we have the children's children of those same folks. And when you listen to them talk today, and you see how they are about that tramp, those are the children of the same people that we're looking at right there. And so I'm very much concerned, I won't say afraid, I'm concerned that we could have similar kinds of things. And here's what you have to understand. Some of us believe that the law is going to protect us. I always say this, go back and look at the films or the video or the recordings of who was attacking, who was it that was attacking men, women, and children in the South about voting. It was the police. Who was it that beat all the black folks at the Pettus Bridge? That was the police, state troopers, and the police. You see what I'm saying here? When you look at the pictures of the children in Montgomery, Alabama, being attacked, and there's some famous photos of a young brother being attacked by some dogs. Whose dogs were they? They were the police's dogs. It was the police right there doing it. And when you see the children being hosed, it was the fire department. It was the police and fire department. You see my point? And I hope I'm getting through to you a little bit to understand that was a war. And that war could very well be coming back. When you have a president who arrogantly refuses to cooperate with the Congress of the United States. He's been calling a witch hunt, a fake this and this, that, and other. He's just outright refusing to cooperate with another branch of government. He sees himself as above the law. And it's becoming clearer and clearer that when it's time for him to get out of the office, he's going to refuse. And you're going to have people who are going to be willing to stand there with him with guns. But understand, it's not going to be just there. They will attack all over the place where they consider, especially the way these cowards are, they're going to look for vulnerable people. They're going to look for black people who are, for an example, black folks who live in white communities, black folks who are in vulnerable situations. Yeah, that's how they work. And then they will attack black communities. Look at the history. North and South, they did it. Go look at the 100 years ago, the red summer of 1919. And I'm just about through, but I wanted to give you at least 3 major massacres to think about, to learn about. We should not ever forget them. And we do need to see that we do learn more about it because, here's the cold part. We don't even know the names of these people that were killed, do we? No. We should find out their names because some of them may be our own people. Okay? This is also land that was taken. They took the land. They took the businesses. Do y'all understand me? Y'all ain't hear me. In any case, there's some food for thought. And as we're going backwards, downhill on a train with no brakes, yeah, you should be concerned. I will see you next time. And remember, no justice, no peace, no love. KNOW.